Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of What the Feminism podcast. Today, I am so excited to have Dr. Jennifer Mike with us. Dr. Mike is an assistant professor of law at the American University of Nigeria and currently a global studies fellow at DePauw University. She brings a wealth of expertise as a qualified legal practitioner, having worked with law firms in both the UK and Nigeria. Her teaching and research span critical areas such as human rights, gender law and development, intellectual property, labor law, and criminal law. Beyond academia, Dr. Mike is a passionate human rights advocate and activist. She has championed women's rights and the right to health, leading important campaigns in those areas. We are incredibly excited to have her today to share her insights on intersectionality, law, and the fight for justice in Nigeria. Dr. Mike, thank you so much for having us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Era, for inviting me.
I think my first question would be, what led you to focus on human rights issues in Africa, particularly Nigeria?
My interest in human rights stems from a personal perspective as well as studies that I started doing as a lawyer. So, from a personal perspective, I grew up in a not so affluent neighborhood. Ironically, we shared a fence with a very affluent neighborhood. So, just over the fence, you will see poverty, abject poverty at that. And then when you look across, you would see a very wealthy neighborhood, people well dressed, in posh cars, and I thought that was just unfair. As a child, I remember thinking, why can't I have what they have over the fence? And I just knew that there must be something wrong somewhere for a society to be polarized in this section. I didn't pay much critical attention to it, but I just knew on the inside that something was wrong. And I've always been an inquisitive child, so I would badger my mother with so many questions. And some of these questions bordered on men and women. As a child, I grew up in a traditional society as well, where girls are not allowed to do certain things, and boys are not allowed to do certain things. But somehow they should not encroach in our territory. There's this very funny incident. So there was this home we went to, and there's this room that girls do not go into. So it's a room where the father does some work related activities in there, but there's this superstitious beliefs that women will kind of taint the work there. I and my sisters, when nobody was around, we went into the room. We wanted to see what was in that room. So I've always felt there was something wrong with this segregation of putting men differently from women, the different treatment. So, and then of course, as I did my legal studies, I got to understand that there's something like human rights, the rights of people, and I knew, this is it. I met my eureka moment where I thought, yes, this is it. Human rights. That is what I have always been thinking about, that it is wrong. Some things are wrong. And, some things are wrong because it's an infringement of rights. So you have a claim and your claim has been infringed upon. So that's how my interest in human rights grew.
I love how we just start with feminism and intersectionality. That is just so cool. I think one of the things that stood out to me the most when I first heard about you was the fact that you're a scholar and also a lawyer. How does that play out?
Oh, well, I don't know if I chose law because I wanted law, because people kind of drummed it into my head that I was going to be a lawyer, that I will make a good lawyer, because I've always asked questions, like I said. So, and I found myself enjoying the law because it helps me to think. I muse over everything. Every little thing I come across, my brain starts working, chewing in the details. And I found out that the law provides me with a wonderful space to do so. And then I thought I should research on certain areas. I should make my own contribution. So I started doing my PhD. But when I was in a PhD, I never thought I would teach. I did that because I wanted to do my research. Just it was a quest for knowledge, so to speak. But during my PhD, every PhD student is expected to teach. And I started teaching and I realized I love this. And I thought, why don't I combine both of them? I can actually eat my cake and get to keep it. So I started doing both of them and it's been wonderful because one flows into the other. So my legal studies helps me to analyze things better and I can also analyze legal issues. So it's just a wonderful combination for me.
That is so interesting. Could you share like a really compelling case which is like stayed to you even now?
So I guess the first one would be why I even chose to focus on women's issues, on women's rights. I just felt there was so much systematic oppression and injustice from a patriarchal perspective in my society. This had to do with my grandmother. So there's this tradition where my mother comes from that a woman who is recently widowed or who is widowed is expected to be married off to one of his brothers. So sort of an inheritance. So the brother will inherit the wife. And it's a tradition that maybe it has some goodwill, good intentions behind it, because it provides an opportunity for the woman to be taken care of and for her children to be taken care of. And who is in a better position to take care of the children than the brother? So I don't think it was really rooted in any negative intention. But the thing is that after a while, it became a tradition that compelled widows to do so. So widows who are not willing to go into that system are ostracized. They face discrimination. And that was the case for my grandmother. So having had 10 children and her husband passed away, she felt this is just too much. I just want to remain in his house, take care of his farms and get some things to take care of my children. My focus is on my children. And they gave her an ultimatum. It's either you leave your husband's home, your home, not even her husband's home, her own home, because of course, having been married to her husband, that becomes her own home. So it's either you leave your own home, leave everything behind, or you marry one of the brothers. And she decided to leave. And I was a baby then, but I knew that it was wrong. I felt that it was wrong. I decided to look into several traditions that limited women's rights. And there's so many of them in my society. Looking at education, as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a not so affluent neighborhood. And what we're taught then was you grow up, you marry. So the basic education is the most important education that you can receive. And I can tell you that most of the young girls that I grew up with, my peers then, didn't go to the university. Most of them ended up at the high school. And that's because of the expectation of society at that time. And I'm also talking about denial of rights to women, to people, to children. So these are some of my experiences that have kind of like fed into what I do and who I am today.
That is so inspiring. I mean, I sort of get that because even if we talk about South Asia, India, a lot of my peers, my generation, we grew up seeing our grandmothers, sometimes even our mothers, just confining into these norms. And then we're like, oh, we don't want to grow up like that. We want to have a different life. And I mean, obviously, I'm like so grateful that I have the resources to come to a university to pursue this.
Yes.
But so many others just don't.
No.
It's just,
no.
Yeah.
So it's about the rhetorics and the environment, the social attitude, and also the resources, the means to pursue your goals. If you do want to push through those narratives, you want to put those narratives behind, it's also the resources and also the willpower to continue, because it's one thing to set out to a goal and to finish it.
Yeah, absolutely. Since you're a lawyer and then you also hold such strong beliefs. Have you ever had an experience where you had like these two conflicting viewpoints, like one as your duty as a lawyer, and then one also as your own moral compass?
Oh yes, oh yes. So sometimes I have to confront my own ingrained bias. I'm a traditional woman, so, and I also believe in equality, equality of the sexes. But I still expect to be taken care of like a traditional woman. So I still expect that when we go out, you pay for our outing because I mean you're the man and I'm the woman, and here I am talking about equality. So sometimes it makes me feel like there is a bit of hypocrisy in some of the things that I think and some of the things that I preach. But then again, I just say, well, humans were allowed to have these fleeting thoughts. And then to a more specific answer to your question, conflict, personal conflict, and the law. So the law says that everybody has the right to defense. No matter who you are to defend. No matter what you believe, if somebody comes before you, you give that person the defense that the person deserves and the best defense. So if the person is a murderer, no matter how bad or heinous the person's alleged offenses are, you just do your best to defend the person. And there was a time when I had to this deep conflict between my own personal belief and my position as a lawyer. So this case came to our law firm and it was passed on to me and my colleague to help to defend this person who had brutally raped a young girl. The rape was so brutal that he destroyed her insides, her uterus. So she was in the hospital for 6 months. So he not only raped her, he used bottles to kind of destroy, such gory details.
Yeah.
And here we were being asked to defend this person in court. When we were going through this case file, not a dry eye in the library, because this is a girl who lost her mother 2 years prior. And her father was just barely getting by, just struggling to take care of them. We read her witness statement, the father's witness statement, and his confession, of course. And it was quite clear that he did it. But because everybody is entitled to legal defense, even from a human rights perspective, we had to defend him, and we were there to prepare defense for him. And one of the defenses that we came up with was insanity, insanity or diminished responsibility. Because of the way he carried out the act, we felt maybe he had schizophrenia or some form of mental ailment that must have led, because he described it as something bordering on schizophrenia. He said he was hearing voices and so on and so forth. And when we went to court, I was praying. I must confess that I was hoping that he would be convicted, even though I was representing him. So this is where he was eventually convicted. But this is where my legal practice and my personal moral beliefs clash. Usually they align, but sometimes you have these clashes.
Yeah, I mean, as I listen to your story, even I pray she should get her justice.
Yes.
But at the same time, I'm like, okay, no, it's innocent until proven guilty.
Exactly.
And that's the code of law. So
yes.
Yeah. Coming to sexual abuse cases in Nigeria, I wanted to understand how effective are Nigerian laws, and are they really feminist? And are they really helpful in curbing sexual assaults?
Okay, so now I will answer that question in two aspects. So on the first front, are the laws effective? I teach criminal law and gender law. I would say that we do have robust laws to combat sexual abuse. There are so many laws, except for one aspect that I think it's not so well. Two aspects. So number one, there's no liability for marital rape. So if a man were to rape his wife, he cannot be held liable because the law specifically states that rape cannot occur between a man and his wife. Then secondly, there's a curious provision in our law for sexual defilement of children. So if a man were to, if there's a rape of a young girl, the prosecution for it must start within 2 months. So generally under criminal law, there's no time bar for offenses. However, a time bar has been placed for the rape of young girls. So girls below the age of 12, from 13 below. If they have been raped, the trial must begin within 2 months. So if a girl has been raped and she does not report that, let's say 5 months later, 6 months later, and eventually she does, he's arrested. Because there's a time bar, he cannot be tried for the sexual defilement of a child. He can be tried for rape, of course, because there is no time bar for rape as a whole. But for children in particular, there's an additional punishment for it, and he cannot be tried for that. And then the laws, again, do not consider it as rape when this is the law in the northern parts of the country, the penal code. When a girl who has attained puberty is married and she is 14, the person who has had sexual intercourse with her cannot be convicted of rape. So the law recognizes early marriage sort of in another way. Then there's another aspect of the law that is not so effective, and that is with respect to punishment of offenders. The punishment sometimes is quite light. And when it comes to the actual implementation of the law, that is where we have the biggest problem. The laws have been there, but the prosecution for rape, unfortunately, has not matched the tenor of the law. So we've seen less prosecution of rape. We've seen so much activism on rape and sexual offenses, but we've seen diminished less and less cases of actual convictions for it. And for me, it stems down to the attitude to rape. So in many cases, the girls are blamed. In other cases, rape are not even reported. And that's because the girl is victim blamed. You placed yourself in that position. You must have done something to be raped. Where were you? Did you place yourself in that position through your dressing? And we've had increased cases of girls actually going to social media to name and shame rather than report to the authorities for prosecution. For them, it helps better. So they receive more social justice rather than legal justice by going on social media to expose the alleged perpetrators. However, that also presents the problem of defamation. Because if you call somebody out and there's no legal proof that the person has committed that offense, it can be considered as defamation. And we've now had cases of high-profile cases where women have been prosecuted for defamation. So there was this girl who went to social media to expose her experience with a very famous pastor in the country. And she was arrested for defamation, for defaming him, because she didn't have proof to show that it actually happened. That case was eventually dismissed because there was so much public uproar. But it also shows how the attitude to rape is from the people who are expected to legally protect the victims of rape. So the laws may not be so effective, but we have it worse with respect to implementation.
I think that's like a similar case in India. I mean, marital rape is still legal. It hasn't been criminalized. Coming back to your second point, I think rape culture is just so prevalent in regions where rape is already, sort of normalized or just avoided and not talked about. So I often think that the legal aspect is not the only thing we should work towards if we want to protect young children, young girls, just like women. I mean, how do you plan to change the social mindset of people when it comes to rape? to like counter victim blaming. Yeah.
So, what we're doing is one of the steps that I recommend. We talk about it. Talking about it helps. So once we start changing the narrative through conversations, it can spur a change. Maybe not now. Maybe the massive change that we expect may not occur now, but it will probably come up someday. What I tell women is to train their sons, because in many cases we train girls, but we don't train boys.
Yeah.
And so I think the approach to this comes from us ladies, not just. So let me start off with the feminine aspect. So almost every boy out there has a sister, has a mother, has a relative who is female.
Yeah.
Now, if you start speaking to your boys, your brothers, your sons, to tell them that, just get them to reimagine if you were the victim, how would they feel? So they should put themselves in the position of the families of the victims. Because a lot of times when we see reports of rape on social media, go to the comment section. Men, women alike, you find this victim blaming and so on and so forth. And sometimes when I want to, I just put a comment there to say, just put yourself in the position of the victim or the family of the victim. Would this be your answer? Would this be your conclusion? And so speaking about it, advocacy, sensitization, trying to change the narrative can really help. In addition to, of course, the amendments in our laws that I have written about, our laws on rape need to be amended in Nigeria. But then changing the social approach to rape is very, very important. Because no matter how robust the laws are, if the attitude to sexual violence is still from a position of victim blaming, we leave the perpetrator out, then there is still a big problem in society. There was a reported case of rape of a minor about 3 months ago in my country. The perpetrator was not shown. His picture was not shown. So we saw this girl. It was the girl's picture that was splashed all over social media. And I thought, well, even if he's an alleged perpetrator, he has not been convicted yet. If you're going to put up a picture which is wrong, I think somehow we should have a side-to-side profile. So we know, so mothers can know that, before this person's innocence has really been established in court, let's just keep our girls away from this person. Not from a discriminatory perspective, of course, but just to be on a safe side. So I think the social attitude to rape and sexual violence has to really change. Even the cultural attitude as well, not just the social attitude, because you find that rape in some societies that are deeply cultural are also ingrained in the cultural norms of the society. So how do they view women? Do they view women as objects of sexual gratification? Do they view women as mere servants, mere objects to be used for whatever pleasure that you want to satisfy, whether it's domestic pleasure, your culinary pleasure, or even sexual pleasure? So the attitude to women, the cultural attitude to women also determines the response to the abuse of women. For some societies, they feel, well, he's just getting his due. Maybe he did it in an extravagant manner. Maybe he was too excessive in demanding for it, but he was only demanding for his due. Oh, she's his girlfriend. She agreed to date him, so why should she deny him the other pleasurable part of being in a relationship? And all those attitudes have to change. So confronting our cultures. And I think religion can play a good role as well. If we get to see, in religious texts, we have so many cases where sexual violence has been condemned, sexual assault has been condemned, and a lot of people are religious. And it kind of beats my imagination that people who try to follow a particular religion do not practice that religion in the true sense of the word, because you're harming somebody. And I remember having this discussion with you in my office, and I told you that rape is one of the most heinous violations of a person. of a woman or even a man. Because when we're talking about rape, we've seen increased cases of rape against men as well, even though that is not considered as rape.
Yeah.
But in many cases, the predominant cases of rape has been overwhelmingly against women. That's why we focus so much on women. So the attitude, in summary, the attitude will have to change. And we're talking about it, we're engaging people, we're including it in curriculum, at the primary, at even the primary school level. The basic level, the most elementary level, we include that in the curriculum. Say that this is wrong, this is bad, you respect a woman. So we start teaching these children civic education and teaching them how to respect females and males, people's bodies, people's rejection of their advances. We teach them that it is wrong from that level.
I think, honestly, it'll take a lot of time to change that, and it depends on societies as well. I think it's more of a generational gap too, and how women are viewed.
Yes, it is changing, but it's going to take a while for us to get there, but we are getting there. At least people are talking about it.
Yeah. I know previously we had a conversation about the rape case that happened in Calcutta against a woman doctor.
Yes.
And so that was all over the news. Like, it stirred up everything.
Yes.
And there were a lot of conversations about how the perpetrators should receive like they should be hanged, and they were talking about capital punishment. But I mean, although capital punishment does like sort of pacify the citizens or the protesters, I've seen like researches where like they've said that it doesn't actually help in like stopping rape or putting fear into the rapist mindset. Yeah. What would you say about that?
The capital punishment system. I 2 weeks ago in my class, one of the students asked me, Professor, do you support the capital punishment system? And I told him, I said, I don't know. I'm still on the fence on that, because when you look at certain offenses, certain heinous offense, like the way it is perpetrated, like the girl that was raped on the bus by those men, she was gang raped. They used, sharp objects, and she eventually died. If I think about that case, the capital punishment will not seem so bad. If I think of certain cases where people will just go to an area, round up the women, rape them, and somehow, if they are convicted, I will not feel so bad. But on the other hand, I'm a human rights activist, and we know that once you execute somebody, you've taken away the person's human rights completely. And we say in human rights that rights can be limited, but it should not be taken away completely. And so I have come to a point where I feel we should kind of punish them. Life imprisonment. We leave them for the rest of their lives to contemplate the consequences of their actions. There's something about the human conscience. No matter how sociopathic you are, you get to a point where you start thinking about your actions, what has brought you in here. And I feel the capital punishment system may even be an easy way out for these people, because we're just taking them away. No, they should live with their actions to send a message. Again, the capital punishment system has proven to be not to be effective, like you said earlier on. Just this week, the longest person who has been on death row was exonerated for over 58 years. This Japanese guy, Awa, I can't quite remember his name right now, has been on death row for the murder of a family. But recent DNA evidence showed that he did not commit the offense. He had always pleaded his innocence to say that he was the evidence against him was implanted, it was fabricated, and he is not the person who committed the offense. And recently, we got to know that he did not commit that offense and he was released just about yesterday or the day before yesterday.
Yeah.
Imagine if he was executed. Imagine that is justice that has been wrongly served and we can never remedy it. So for rape cases, sexual violence, I'm of the opinion that we should have long sentences. In my country, it's 14 years. I feel 14 years is too small. Some states have amended their laws to make it life imprisonment.
Yeah.
We have another federal law in my country that kind of gives a life imprisonment aspect to it. But the capital punishment, I don't think I'm going to toe towards that line. Even though, as a human being who has, emotions, I'm thinking, wow, if you rape and you kill somebody, then the same thing should be done to you. Killed, of course. That, just thinking about it more critically and logically, I would go for a longer sentence, just so that you can mentally suffer for what you have done.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially when you take into consideration that victims of rape have to live with that experience their entire life.
They have to live with it.
And it
changes them. It changes people completely. Your emotions, the way you view life, it erodes that sense of dignity that you have in yourself. It's been stolen. It's been taken away.
Yeah.
And you get to feel just so hopeless. And some people carry this through life. Some people are able to max it. Some people are able to overcome it. But for some people, it becomes their identity for the rest of their lives. So let's also have the perpetrator live with the consequences of this.
Yeah. And also, I think if by any chance the perpetrator does feel, let's say, remorse for what, like actual true remorse, which I'm sure, like, I mean, I don't know, they hardly do. Criminal systems don't really make the perpetrator feel so. Like, criminal reform, I don't know how, like, it's not very effective in most countries.
No,
but even like a shred of remorse.
No, not at all. But then again, the criminal justice system it has been criticized for not being victim focused. So it is more focused on punishing the offender rather than offering some form of remedy to the victim. So in many crimes right now, they are moving towards transitional justice, where you have the victim and the perpetrator. If the victim can withstand it, because sometimes facing your perpetrator can trigger, certain traumas. So if they can, they sit down and tell the perpetrator, this is what you did to me. You stole my innocence. You stole my dignity. You took away that basic integrity that I had in my body. It was for me to say no. And I said no, but you insisted on having your way. And this is how I feel about it. So sharing that with the perpetrator helps the victim to get some form of closure from that event that has happened. And in some cases, there's usually a screen in between. If it's sexual offenses, there's a screen in between the victim and the perpetrator. So you're speaking to the person at the other end, and the person is responding. And the person gets to express remorse before they can even come through this process. Of course, they should be willing to go through that remorse process, and they express their remorse, and they apologize if in most cases they do, and it helps. They're still punished.
Yeah.
But it also helps the victim to deal with the act that has happened. Yeah. And this is done within the context of the criminal justice system, not just some form of psychological treatment that is given to victims, but the criminal justice system itself is moving towards the victim-centered approach, and it's working in certain jurisdictions. And I'm hoping that your country and my country and your continent, because this is more of a continental issue here, we have so many similarities. I'm hoping that our justice system will invest in this kind of transitional justice.
We do share so many similarities. In fact, Nigeria and India are both they both share a colonial past,
of course,
which is one of the things that I want to dive into right now. I know Nigeria is a diverse country,
yes, it is.
And I wanted to know, are there like any cultural differences in different parts of the country that sort of play out in, feminist issues such as like sexual abuse cases?
Oh, yes. Nigeria is heterogeneous, so many ethnic groups. We have over 360 languages that are spoken, and with
Wow.
so many other ethnic groups in the country. And each community, in a community, you can find up to one or two different ethnic groups there, or you can have just one major ethnic group, but with different variations in their norms, traditional norms. And you find that these norms have played a huge role in sexual abuse, sexual violence. So the northern part, again, regionally, they have a particular culture that may be more closely related to each other in the southern part, in the eastern part. Fortunately, my father is from the southern part. My mother is from the middle part. I work in the northern part, and I have also worked in the western part. So pretty much all parts of Nigeria, I have been there. And I tell you that my experiences have been different from one region to the other, especially as a woman.
Yeah.
I find that I enjoy my rights more in certain parts of the country than other parts of the country. So I'll tell you a very funny incident. I went to the market one day in the northern part, and this young boy pushed me. He shoved me. He actually shoved me. So it's not just a crowded marketplace where people are just trying to move past, but he deliberately shoved me. And I turned to him and I said, "Oh, young boy, why would you do this? Can you apologize now for doing this?" And some men told me, no, you don't talk to a man like that. He's a man. You don't talk to a man like that. And I said, talk to a man how? I only demanded for him to be more cautious and not to be rude. I'm older than him, and I think I have earned the right to speak to him as an older person. And they said, no, he's a man. You don't talk to a man like that. You're a lady. So you see, that boy is going to grow up thinking he can get away with certain actions towards women because he is a man. So the society teaches him to exert some form of negative authority and get away with it because he is a man. So the social attitude, the culture as well, women are expected to be subservient, to be on the receiving side, to be demure, to be to give, to be caring, to be accommodating. And sometimes when they do not do this, they are actually forced or compelled to. I remember when I was a bit younger, I was a teen, I would go to this area and these young boys were making catcalls, and I would tell them, no, I'm not interested in this. And I heard, my cousin told me one day that I should not go through that area, I should not walk through that path, that the boys decided that I am too arrogant and they were going to beat me and rape me to humble me.
Oh my God.
And that is what they said. So for long, it was a shorter path to get to the city, but then I had to take a detour, a longer path. But I will never forget, how that threat came about simply because I was not giving into their advances, or I was not responding very well, favorably to their advances. So yes, culture, the way people are perceived, the way women are perceived, the subjugated perception of women cuts across all cultures, if you ask me, in Nigeria. But it varies. Education has helped in certain regions. In other regions, it has not improved so much, especially when it is mixed with religion. When it is rooted in religion, it becomes even more difficult to change that perception, because a person's faith, a person's religious belief, they hold so strongly to it that it is very hard to logically change that mindset. So to answer your question, yes, it differs from one region to another. It's everywhere, but some regions or some cultures hold onto this subjugated approaches to women more strongly than others.
That makes sense. I mean, I would say it's similar for India too. Historically, like in the 1600s, it was when the British had come, it was very different how women were, when women had like different sort of traditions in, let's say, Bengal versus southern India. And there are like anecdotes of women traveling to these places and just seeing, how it's so different. And colonialism impacted as well. For instance, in the eastern parts of India, women we would wear saris, right? But then a lot of these women wouldn't wear blouses underneath. It would just be the cloth wrapped around. Now the British come and they're like, oh, this is not acceptable. Why are you like showing your body? So more educated middle class women started wearing blouses, so that would cover their chests, and the British sort of encouraged that, and that's how a lot of women now wear saris with blouses, and this entire idea of modesty, it's sort of like changed. I'm not saying that it wasn't bad for women before the British came. I'm just saying it sort of got worse with like colonialism. It changed with colonialism.
Yes. And I quite agree with you. You brought up an interesting point. The objectification of women, I think, grew more during after the colonial invasion of many countries. So in my country, for example, it used to be that in certain parts, we didn't really invent this full clothing and covering and all. When they came, they felt moving around with your chest all out as a lady was immoral. And so certain parts that were considered as reproductive parts, for example, the breast, for example, used to be for children. So all of a sudden it was sexualized.
Yeah.
And so you have to be covered up. And so if a lady chooses to expose that part that was hitherto not considered as a sexual part, now she's objectified, she's seen as exposing a private part. And I used to tell my students when I do my gender law class, was clothing part of us? When you talk about a woman inviting the rape that she got because she exposed her part, she enticed him. And I tell them, before now, we had people who were roaming around naked, stark naked. Were they raped? No. This whole idea of a woman covering herself, she has to be covered up to cover her modesty, was actually imported. And it has entered into our consciousness. So, yes, we do have some cultural attitudes, but then the colonial era brought in its own fair share of discriminatory approaches towards women, or created a form of approach towards women that has continued to fuel sexual violence till date. Another area, for example, if you look at the law, you find certain laws that were not there in the first place. For example, the law on adultery. The law on adultery was actually imported into. So adultery is an offense in certain parts, in the northern part of the legal provision. Adultery was not an offense. It was a social offense, but it was not a legal offense before they brought this. So it was a law that was actually brought into our country. And it's a law that we share with India, but the Indian Supreme Court in the last about 4 years ago actually abolished that law because they said it was discriminatory to women. So Nigeria and India, we have very similar laws. In fact, our laws come from the same source, the colonial. Yes, it's from the same source. India has gone on to amend some of its laws. The courts have been quite proactive in bringing down some of these laws. My country, unfortunately, has remained mute to these laws. They do not activate them, but they are still there. They can be activated at any time against anyone. So there's just one case of adultery in Nigeria, prosecution for adultery in Nigeria, but the law still exists in that part of the country. And I remember writing a paper to call for an abolition of that adultery law, because if you look at the charges for adultery, so we've not had we actually have convictions. So we've had women who have been convicted of adultery. That's because pregnancy is often proof of adultery. So the pregnancy has actually been the greatest downfall for some of these women, because their husbands were away and they got pregnant. And the logical conclusion is that you committed adultery to get pregnant. So this women were convicted. And even in the Sharia law that applies to the northern part of the country, that's the law where they were convicted under. It sentenced them to death, and death by stoning.
My God.
Yeah, so the international community had to really come in. There was a lot of public outcry, national, international outcry.
Yeah.
And that is when the light on adultery laws, where they shone a lot of light on adultery laws to show that there's a big problem with this law because it's going to work against women much more than men. And these adultery laws, looking at it, tracing down the history, it's a colonially imported law. So colonialism has brought its own fair share.
Yeah, it's another important, I think, subtopic under intersectionality.
Yes.
Yeah. I think one of the last things like I'd like to highlight is that when you talked about international pressure, protests and everything, I sort of find it sad that only some of these cases ever get highlighted.
Yes.
And only some of these cases like ever stay in the news.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just die out.
Mm-hmm.
And then it happens again and again and again and again.
Somebody else. The next. Yeah.
That is one thing.
For me, reporting these cases is good to highlight, the prevalence. But then again, we have to be careful not to become desensitized to such cases. Yeah. So a few days ago, it was in the media that young boys raped a 7-year-old in India.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
About 2 of them. So it's not just the older population, it's even the children. Yeah. Again, in my country, it was in the news that a man raped a girl of 5.
Oh my God. Mm.
And then it was also in the news that a man raped a girl. So we've had so many of these cases. People are becoming more desensitized to it. It's like, okay, oh, this happened. At first, you have the shock value. Oh, this is really happening? We're having men rape young girls, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. Oh, that's appalling. Then you hear it again, and then you hear it again. You go, okay, it happened again. Oh, that's sad. Oh, it has happened again. Oh, so there's less action towards it because people feel it becomes sensationalized.
Yeah.
It becomes a sensational news rather than news that should demand action. So there's this international spotlight on it as well. Even when it goes international, there's this attitude towards it like, oh, well, rape is prevalent in this country and it has happened again in this case, but nothing is done about it. So when the news becomes more than an actionable lesson and it becomes a sensational information, then there is another problem. So even the way the media reports it, it becomes another problem. I would want a follow-up. There's so many cases of rape that have happened. We hear in the news and there's no follow-up on it.
Yeah.
For the doctor, we don't know what has happened to the men that were arrested. In so many cases, even in my own country, we hear that somebody has committed rape in a very gruesome manner, was arrested, but we don't hear of the conviction. So we don't have so many reports of convictions. Just to tell people that when they commit this act, they will not get away with it. So the aspect you brought up about the media is quite important as well. How is the media reporting it? How are we responding to these reports? And what are we doing about these reports?
Yeah. I think that's like a sad, incomplete note to end the podcast and this episode on. But it's been wonderful talking to you. And it's been really enlightening because we touched on so many different topics. Yeah, and thank you so much again for...
I don't think I have been... I've ever been this comfortable sitting down and just talking about something that requires, mental work. I feel like I can do this forever. I can talk and talk. You make it so easy to talk to you. I know we've had conversations around this in my office and we're having another one here. And it's very, very good topics that we're talking about. And it's good to see that young girls are taking this up and discussing it because I feel your generation hold the key. My generation, we also hold the key because I'm not that old. So I'm not so far from your generation.
Yeah.
So we hold the key, but the actionable key lies in your hands. And for you people to be highlighting this, discussing this, listening to this, I think it's prompting an actionable plan in your heads, and eventually we'll get to see an execution of these actionable plans. Keep this up. You're doing a wonderful job. And I really love what you do. And to tell you what, I actually recommended your Instagram page to some of my students. So I sent it to them. I said, this student who is in this wonderful thing. Have a look at it. It's wonderful. And this and this and
Thank you so much. That means so much to me.
I really like what you're doing. It's so wonderful being here. I'm happy being part of this. When I talk about women, gender, and so on and so forth, it's my era, it's my passion. So it's something that I love to do, and it's good to have somebody to share this with.
I mean, I would just say that we are inspired by women like you, and we hope to be somebody like you someday.
Oh, thank you. You're well on your way.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. That was all for this episode, and I hope you enjoyed our illuminating conversation with Dr. Jennifer Mike. If you did, please let us know so that we can create more episodes like this for you all. Do check out our show notes. Our socials are down below. And don't forget to listen to other episodes about the Feminism podcast. We have some really good stuff coming. Anyways, that's all for this episode, and have a wonderful week ahead of you. Bye-bye. Take care. Bye.